So don't worry about those. I can actually... Welcome to Zen Live TV. This is the Alien Scientist Science and Controversy Hour. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of our audience, our producers, or the guests we may have on from week to week. Today's topic, we'll be talking about consciousness, awareness, and the science of the human mind, and how the human brain functions in your reality, which is worked through your perceptions and your influenced by your environment throughout your life, and comes into who you are as a being through the way you perceive the world.
And how you perceive yourself in the world, or your country in the world. We're going to talk about also some techniques that the media uses to help frame the way that people see the world or themselves, so that it's beneficial to those in power, or the people who are putting a lot of money into programming in the media. So it would just kind of be an overview of the psychological tactics of how propaganda works, how disinformation works, how censorship works, and the effect it has on the way that we act in the world or see things.
Right, and this is sort of just an expansion off a couple previous episodes that I've done with Matt here, who will be my guest. And for more information on those things, I suggest going back and watching some of the past episodes that I have done with Matt, where we talk about a lot of these kinds of things, because you probably get a lot of other stuff from those as well.
We'll post up some links to make it easy.
And I'll post links in the description to other more advanced reading for some of the things we're going to be talking about today, for you to be able to follow up on and get more information on those sorts of things. But the main thing I want to talk about is consciousness, and really what is consciousness, and what it means to become conscious of things, and not just the whole misperception of consciousness as a lot of other people have sort of thought about this, but really what it means to be when information comes into your awareness, and
how you deal with it, how you analyze it, the connections you make, which is why media is such a powerful tool. They're the ones giving you the information, showing you how you should interpret it, making the connections already for you. You know, it's how people get information to begin with. Is a big part of how they hold on to it, whether they're stubborn about it, whether they look for new information or not. So having a hand in how people see the world, how people create their own realities, is very important in manipulating or predicting how people are going to act in the future.
Right. So when we talked about, we were talking about mind control sort of before the show. It's sort of a recurring topic. In fact, that was in the title of some of the past episodes that we've done. But really what we were saying before is mind control is more about perception control, or
worldview control, ideology control. They want to influence the way that you analyze stuff in the future, so that when they feed you propaganda, it's as effective as possible. The same way, you know, if you go and see information that's not presented by an institution that's very propagandized, they want to already influence the way that you're going to see that information or feel about it. So it's kind of reworking the way that we view reality, the way that we view information, so that it's more helpful to the messages they're trying to send, even if they're not truthful, even if they're manipulative.
Right, and you were mentioning before, even the Nazis knew kind of about this. They called it worldview warfare. Their word for it, I won't even attempt to pronounce it, but worldview warfare is sort of the way that the Nazi propaganda model was based upon, and that was about just shaping people's worldviews. Your worldview is just your way of looking at the world, the way that you see the world, the way that, you know,
the world shows up to you,
based on the way you analyze it. And I talk about the way my worldview, and how being someone who studied physics and went into the scientific disciplines, and sort of, I have a different worldview than other people. Of course, I have different background and experiences than a lot of physicists, and I have a lot of I mean, I'm a lot different than most of the physicists out there, certainly, because I have my own individual worldview,
well, based on your experiences, based on what you've researched, you might have seen things or looked deep into things other people hadn't. One of the easiest way to explain it is, a lot of people talk about world experience in the form of space and time, that we all exist in the same space and time. But in reality, it's sort of our human being, our first-person perspective in time. You could have, you know, a doctor and a non-doctor in a room with somebody who's sick, and they could both be looking at the same person. The person who has the background in a PhD is going to have all this familiarity of things they can pick up on that wouldn't show up to the other person unless they had done that research.
Right.
So,
right. And even people that had no idea about physics, they look at things in the world completely different than the way I look at them. I know that they're made up of atoms, and I know that those atoms have different properties on the subatomic level, which lead to the properties which we observe on the macroscopic level, like what makes this water bottle clear or the water inside it clear, what makes those visible electromagnetic waves be able to pass through this material as opposed to other materials.
Exactly, and that's the difference between somebody experiencing something just as an experience and somebody experiencing something with an understanding of what drives it, what creates the phenomenon that they're experiencing. And a lot of the things with the media is it's hard to tell for the regular user of what is accurate and what isn't.
Right.
You know, you're both looking at this thing, but the properties of its authenticity, its value, the whole purpose of worldview warfare is to pre-adjust the way that we look into things so that it's in line with the way they want things to be perceived.
Right, and it's kind of like as you become more aware of different types of propaganda and also like just what's going on in the world and everything else, you can't even watch, like I have friends who can't even watch certain movies because their propaganda is so obvious to them, or even when they watch TV, it's like all those techniques are apparent and aware to them because they're already aware of, you know, what the lie in the background that they're covering up. So if you're already...
and the technique is lost on them. You know, whatever manipulation it's having sort of disappears. And one of the greatest tools we can
It disappears for the people who don't know the lie behind it, right?
It's non-apparent for the people who don't know the lie, but the people who understand the lie,
right,
the effect of the propaganda disappears. It's no longer effective because they're aware of the manipulation that's trying to be carried out on them. And so much of waking people up is showing them these manipulation tactics and techniques that are used daily in the media so that when they run into it, they can see it and reevaluate it based on that rather than just sort of taking it as information that's given to them.
But at the same time, with one of the most effective techniques is censorship. You may know that there's techniques, and you may recognize them when you're watching TV. You're like,
but censorship disappeared. It's void.
But you won't know what else is behind it. You'll only know that this seems kind of fishy. This seems like there's more to the story here, rather than you won't necessarily be able to know the information because they've censored it from you.
The whole effectiveness of censorship is that you can never claim what you don't know, and you can never claim how deep the hole goes of what you don't know. By the virtue of not knowing it, it's not defined of what it is. So the ability to hide things from people's worlds is a great way that the people in power use to stop protests, to stop people standing up to things that they wouldn't be okay with.
Or even to stop the flow of just regular information, because you talk to people that have access to classified information, and it's like, yeah, it's stuff that most everybody knows, but it's only, here it is in writing, in documented form, like it's, like proving.
It's there.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. I think I hit a button and it hung up. But anyways, yeah. So the information is there, but it's not apparent to the person until they've
well, yeah, and
stumbled across it.
It's the tree falling in the forest phenomenon. The whole idea is that if something happens outside of your perception, it isn't part of your world until it enters your perception in some way. You could have a friend across the country who's doing something right now, and the reason you're going to ask him, hey, what did you do yesterday, is because he's filling you in on something that already existed, is already true, other people probably experienced him doing it, but it's not part of your world yet. And what the media, again, tries to do is they want to be the controller of when people get exposure to new worlds and new events of things that are going on. They want to define what they see, what they don't see, the way that it's explained, the connections that are made. They want to frame the way that it gets stored into your memory, into your understanding, so that future propaganda is more successful. The whole idea is they stack lies on lies. The way that you can make somebody believe a lie is to attach it to another lie that justifies it, even though both of them are incorrect.
Right, because as I explained, the way we evaluate truth is through accord, and it's whether it accords to prior knowledge or prior experience. So if you stack all these other lies, they'll be like, oh yeah, well that has to be true because of this, this, and this.
It stacks up
even
with all
though
these
all
other
of those
things.
are lies.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's like our ability to determine whether something is true or not is based on our systems of proving whether things are true and exactly what they are. So it's there was a really interesting thing where one of the philosophy articles I was reading of it was called The Essence of Truth. So it said, we're not going to talk about specific truths, but what it is perceptually for somebody to experience something that is then truth. And really all it comes down to is what it takes to convince somebody. Some people can be convinced very easily by information that shouldn't even be convincing. Some people are so stubborn, even all the information in the world won't convince them. Truth to them is bridging over to that being convinced position. And one of the things this article was bringing up was, people say, it's a true joy to hang out and go to this beach today. And, is it true? If they really feel it and it's actual, then I guess that's something that's true. And this is sort of what the article's saying. And then it goes on to say, well, what if you have real gold and fool's gold? They're both actual, they're both real, they both exist. What makes one fool's gold? What makes one actual gold?
Iron pyrite versus...
Well, yeah, it's a different chemical property, but why was one pre-created to be authentic and the other one to be fake? What happens is we design systems of what is true or not in order to gauge things, and then we look back to those systems to figure it out, and those systems are not always complete. They might be based on outdated information.
They might be just based on that we think everything's a conspiracy because we've seen so many of just lies and deception from the government in the past.
Sure.
So that's sort of how I analyze a lot of the people within the conspiracy movement.
There's a lot of people who don't look at things specifically. Case by case, what they'll do is they feel betrayed in general, and then they're very weary of things in general. It's good to be suspicious of things in general, especially with the amount of corruption, even in the small amount of research in the past 10 years I've overturned. I would definitely recommend being very suspicious and look into everything. But to claim that everything's a conspiracy because you've ran into other conspiracies misses the point that somebody's going to call you on why it is, and you're going to hurt the movement of the real conspiracies and things that actually do hold up by not having an argument for it. So, it's important to look into the specifics and really get to the bottom of why something is such, instead of just using information that's convenient to what you're trying to argue. So many people will repost articles online without even reading the article because it's convenient to the position that they hold.
Right. It's oh yes, I believe this. So
I already believe this. I want to show people this is true. I don't really need to read into it to verify if my initial belief was true. So much people. The media teaches this arrogance.
Everyone runs into that, though.
Well, true, but the media tries to teach this arrogance. It tries to make it so it's more prevalent because it's very useful to have, those types of outlooks.
Especially the right, left, and propaganda on either side. It's like the conservatives are taught to have this image that, liberals are all stupid and they
why listen to them? And the liberals are like, well, they're just stubborn and they don't want change in any. I mean, you have the same power structure putting money into both sides. Both sides are bringing us into endless wars, banker bailouts, international, supranational agreements like CAFTA, NAFTA, things that just hurt other countries.
I'm a libertarian, but when I try to talk to people about my political views, they always if they're left wing, they always think I'm right wing. If they're right wing, they always think I'm left wing. It's vice versa.
The whole idea is instead of having an actual conversation that both sides are being screwed over by the top. Each side pre-associates each other with something that they hate, and they're already at a position where they want to prove they're right rather than actually understanding each side. It's simple divide and conquer. The whole idea is both sides are being screwed, and instead of them coming together to fight against the people at the top screwing them, they battle against each other so that the people at the top can keep their power.
So interesting how that's worked so effectively for the past 12 years now going on. Both Bush administrations and Obama, people should have been fully woken up,
and Clinton. But this is the whole point. A lot of the people during Bush who woke up later on, and some of them defended Obama when they did it because it was their side, and they feel they have the lesser of the evil and they have to support something, or else it's they're going to be supporting the greater evil. But in reality, both sides really need to be reevaluated, and keeping it in a two-party paradigm traps the voters into a pony race where both sides are bought out. Whoever wins the race, the same people, advisors come into power, bankers, corporation apparatus in the background still gets set up. But the point is, how do you continue something over a period of time that's very bad to people? You split it in half and you make each side think it's the other side that's causing it, and if only they could get their person in, it would be fixed. And you just cycle through that for as long as you can. None of these things I support, but it's more of just breaking down how it's done so that we don't fall for those traps. We demand systems that don't trap us into those situations to begin with before we can even voice our opinion or vote.
Right. And I think it's really interesting how the political structures has this divide and conquer method and how effective it has been. And the media control over everything too, with them buying out all the 6 major corporations, the big 6, just buying out all the 90% of the major mass media in the U.S.
Yeah,
they basically have a monopoly on information and a monopoly on people's worldviews, the way that they perceive and analyze the world through the information that they're given about it daily.
Yeah. And cross investment, like ABC has investments in NBC. They get hurt if they call out each other for being frauds. It's sort of this interdependent conglomerate that gets hurt if any of their parts fail. So they kind of are all, and what they represent to begin with is their advertising money. I mean, their income comes from advertisers. It's the amount of viewers they can get in front of them is how much their advertisers are willing to pay. So from the very beginning, the viewer is the commodity. And what's being sold to them is it's how many viewers can we get in front of the TV based on whatever thing we want to exploit in order to get as many viewers as possible. So the reason why so much censorship takes place is the money for these stations to begin with comes from huge corporations who are Exxon Mobil and BP and all these companies. But when they do horrible things around the world, there's an interest in not reporting on the company who's paying your bill. And time again, you have these protection of invested interests where media companies won't pursue stories because the advertising company they use, who represents hundreds of firms, represents that company. And a lot of times they even sign contracts. We even said before, we're talking about sports athletes, where Muhammad Ali, stood against Vietnam publicly. When's the last time a sports athlete has made a political stand against the president or against something the United States is doing? It actually, if you look deeper into it, they have to sign contracts. They go, hey, you've worked your whole life to get into the big leagues. You're here. These are the list of contracts you have to sign in order to finally be part of it. And one of those is not to take political stances against administrations publicly.
Or not even just administrations, even political, other kinds of issues and stuff. Because there was something recently with one coach or something made some comment about Aaron Hernandez, who's going through the whole murder trial here in Boston and everything, and it made some big stink, and the guy got fired and had to leave his position.
I mean, these are pre-signed contracts. They're like, hey, you want the millions of dollars, you want to live your childhood dream, you got to sign these contracts.
It does make more sense that would sort of happen in boxing, where it's sort of an individual thing rather than in
a team
football or a team sport, where it's like, you don't have as much of a voice, or
That's very
you're
true.
this boxing champion and kind of.
But even still, you don't see it in boxing. I mean, there was one example. It was not this year, but it was a soccer event. I think it was in like 2005 or something. Where, I forget the area. There was a coal mining incident where there was a really bad slave labor and conditions going on, and what this person did was he had a message under his shirt, and after scoring a big goal, he flipped his shirt up to show the message, because supposedly that most of the world wasn't listening or it wasn't being reported on, so he wanted to use the viewership of this game in order to get the message out, and he was fired off the team. So where is the ability for dissent? Or corporate dissent, or corruption dissent, or government dissent with an institution that is that structure?
Well, it's one of the best ways for the structure to maintain its power and control is through the elimination of dissent, and also the engineering of a culture where dissent and political statements and political opinions are discouraged socially, and especially in other environments, like, don't talk about religion or politics at parties.
In business and parties, It's seen as something disrespectful rather than something that needs to be reanalyzed. I mean, the most important thing to avoid issues or to avoid future problems is to reanalyze how you've gotten where you are, how you've gotten to things when they didn't work out properly. And anybody who gets offended by a reevaluation of how things could be better is setting up a system that's not able to adapt to its environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. But all right, we got 10 minutes, and then we're gonna take a break. But why don't we recap on the whole consciousness and basically how this all relates to consciousness of what you're aware of and also what we're ignorant of and what sort of our unconscious or not like
Sure.
sort of fully, not fully aware of, you know what I mean?
Sure, and it's a mixture of all of those. You know, as far as understanding a world or experiencing a world, what you see is just as important as what you don't see as far as framing an outline of what you take to be. So, you know, hiding information is very important. If you look at the Walter Lippmann, we'll post some of these articles. He was one of the original propagandists from the 1920s. A lot of his work was used by the Nazis, by other parties. I mean, it was very powerful propaganda information. And so much of what he was saying was that if you hide things, those are blind spots in his perspective, that you could then use stereotypes to fill in what was hidden. So if there was information that you didn't want the public knowing, you could hide it from them and replace it with propaganda or with a shorthanded interpretation of what's going on that kind of overgeneralizes or is very propaganda based. So his whole notion was sculpting people's realities by hiding stuff from them, by being selective of what you showed them, how you showed it to them, what type of mentality it would create. And if you look through a lot of deceptions, it's called information bubbles. What they want to do is trap you within a set amount of information so that their argument seems valid. Like the Iraq War would be a good example. Leading into it, they had all these arguments of why wouldn't Saddam, you know, if there really weren't weapons of mass destruction, why won't he let our inspectors in and such and such? And then if you go, you know, deeper into it, he actually did allow the inspectors in, and UN inspectors went in, but some of the US ones denied to go in just so they could claim that he wouldn't allow them in. And once you have that information, you go, well, wait a minute, what I initially thought was a valid argument becomes invalid because of this new information.
And so what about this whole, it's the same thing with, I think, with this flight that got shot down over the Ukraine, where they're sort of made this public perception in the, you know, through the media to people about what happened. And in front of Time magazine says that we're going to need to start a new Cold War as a result of this whole thing, and the media that's perfect because the Cold War was awesome for the military-industrial complex.
And it was the earlier never-ending war. I mean,
it was a perfectly excuse to build and stockpile arms, which all that money went to the manufacturers who built those, and the contracts went to those people. So
it justified geopolitical expansions. I mean, so much of what 9/11 allowed this world to do, they supported other infrastructures that allow us, you know, like for instance, just on and on and on. If you look at the Taliban in Afghanistan, it was created and very much brought up by the United States during the Afghanistan-Russian war. You have things where we create what then becomes our enemies, and we sort of, not we, but the United States builds their enemies and then uses them as a justification, this thing they created to then invade a country later or to attack it.
Yeah, the covert intelligence agencies and the private corporations who work under them as general contractors unaffiliated with the government out of the reach of protection and FOIAs and other sort of information requests that these people operate under.
Absolutely.
And most of them operate as a direct wing of the banking establishment, as intelligence and spy work has most generally been done by the bankers and as an extension of financial institutions. So you have this sort of global intelligence apparatus which, you know, funds Syrian rebels, funds these sort of these gas attacks that they used to start up this scare that they were almost going to start in a war to invade Syria, you know, a couple months ago, and then now it's this flight, which a lot of my friends online and people are online are just saying, dude, this is a false flag. This is like
supposedly there's information that there's satellite information that shows that it was shut down by the Ukraine. A very good research documentary on this is the BBC did a documentary. I think it was 92 or 94. Excuse me. It was called Operation Gladio. And so basically after, I believe it was World War II, the United States left sleeper cells in all of these European countries. And this is BBC reporting it. They interview the Ministry of the Military who was involved in it, direct interviews with people who were involved in these projects, papers, documentations for these projects. But basically what would happen is we'd leave huge amounts of arms hidden, as well as sleeper cells of militaries in all of these European countries. And if a government was elected or came into power that wasn't convenient for a corporate or U.S. interests worldwide, we would get these sleeper cells and we'd have them dig up the The United States would have them dig up the ammunition. This is under the OSS before even the creation of the CIA. And they would kill civilians. They would create civil unrest to the point where people would either rally against the local government, or they could have the international community come in with force and take over the local government. But this is a very well documented example of this, even reported by the BBC, completely unclassified. But you have interviews with Italian defense ministry, and what they're saying is the reason we attack civilians is if you attack the government only, people won't trust the government to protect them. So the whole idea is that you create unrest in the civilians so that they turn to the government for protection. But I highly recommend just looking back at that, the history of even, almost a decade ago, what we've been doing. So these are just sophistications and continuations of these policies worldwide in order to create events where the U.S. is allowed to act, just like with 9/11 and other things. It creates the support or the ability for them to defend their actions that they already wanted to do in the first place.
It's interesting to think if the Russians don't have their own sleeper cells over here and stuff. There's a lot of scare about that during the Cold War and whatnot. And,
well, yeah, I mean,
not just the Russians, but other I'm sure other agencies and the Israelis and Chinese.
There's a lot of espionage and spying definitely going on, but there's also a lot of allies between corporate bonds across nations.
Because I remember reading those CIA manuals that they dropped over the countries for the sabotage to cause civil unrest. These manuals that basically taught people to put nails in the roads on highways to pop car tires and shut down traffic and lanes and do all sabotage engines on trucks and vehicles. And
it's ridiculous. I mean, some of the stuff made my stomach drop. There's a documentary we can post. There's 2 different documentaries under this name, but one of them, it's called Secrets of the CIA. It has interviews with ex-CIA members. I think it's about 5 of them. Direct interviews. It's appalling, the things that they did. For instance, really quick before we go to a break, in Cuba, they'd go and stop meat trucks that would be bringing food to children, as well as the milk. They'd let the meat go rotten. They poured cement in the milk and then gave it to children. They would do all these things to create civil unrest in order to either have the local governments overthrown locally or have international institutions coming in. I mean, but just sabotaging children and using that sabotage as a reason to overthrow the government, even though it was created by the CIA.
They prefer children because that would cause more of an emotional outrage for people who've seen what was going on. They'd get more upset about it.
The whole idea is manipulating people's responses, and a big part of that is worldview warfare, which is already molding the way that their brain would process information to begin with before one of these events is done.
Interesting. Well, on that thought, we'll come back after this quick commercial break. Roll commercials. Thank you, Alex.
Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired?
Yes.
Does the stress of daily life seem just too much?
Yes.
Are you simply fed up?
Yes.
Do you wish you could just make it all chill out?
But how?
Well, then you need a Royale grinder. Royale grinder is a jumbo-sized 2.5-inch diameter premium 4-piece herb grinder that fits in the palm of your hand, with 50 closely interlined, everlasting chunky teeth that will keep on shredding whatever enters your chamber.
I can use it for all my herbs. Thanks, Royale Grinder. I'll never feel shitty again.
Order now at www.royalegrinders.com. That's www.royalegrinders.com.
Smoker and you need to quit, but you're discouraged cause it's harder than some like doing me. Baby, why plays paper? Baby, why plays paper? Are you a non-smoker but you like to do the tricks? Well, these are non-toxic clouds that exit your lips. White Plains Vapors, located at 210 Mamaroneck Avenue in White Plains, New York. Visit our location and choose from a wide selection of exotic flavors.
And we are back live. We have a call-in guest, Ken Griggs, who was actually on the past 2 weeks with us, talking about some of the other things. And didn't know if you have a question for us today, Ken.
Well, I'm excited to join you guys again. And one of the questions that I have is this idea of relative knowledge. And what I mean by that is something along the lines of Bayes' theorem. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. But I guess the question is...
Bayes' theorem, you said? With an
Bayes. No, B-A-Y-E-S.
All right. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, essentially what Bayes' theorem allows you to do is to talk about relative probability. So instead of knowing absolutely how things happen or what things are going on, you only have relative knowledge of what's going on. And by virtue of that relative knowledge, how do you make good decisions?
Yeah.
All right. So, for example, how do you play poker better when you don't really know, what's in the other guy's hands? And so Bayes' theorem at least gives you a mathematical framework for judging and making better predictions, or the best predictions that you can, given the lack of knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it here on Wikipedia. It's basically a multiplicity of probabilities, and
that's right.
Yeah, this is interesting because I thought of something very similar to this on my own, but I'm glad you pointed this out and brought this up because I wouldn't have known about this or maybe even found it myself. This is really interesting because I've always thought of I've always pictured it as like you have a logic tree inside your head that you build. It's based on all these little things which you take as to be truth or factual, and you build upon those. It's kind of like mentioning before.
Yeah, it's like a referential totality of.
You have a referential totality to all these little pieces. So as you get bits and pieces of lies told to you by the media, you base your future interpretation of the world upon those interpretations. And those may not be just through the mass media or through the news. It could be through movies like True Lies. I remember when the movie True Lies came out with Arnold Schwarzenegger, I had some Middle Eastern friends who were boycotting the movie and telling everyone not to go see that because of the way it portrayed Middle Eastern people as terrorists in the movie. And that's a sort of a subtle way of sort of conditioning people with this sort of propaganda because they see these stereotypes
expectations
in movies,
of reality.
Yeah, and they build their expectations of future reality. So I had sort of envisioned this whole idea of your worldhood being based on all these little things which you hold to be true or you hold to be factual, but those are all much better thought of as probabilities according to this.
Exactly.
That's sort of the way I thought of them is rather than just holding them as absolute truths, you hold them as ambiguities, like it's probably true, or maybe it would be even better.
There's a high likelihood.
Use this to assign probability.
Throughout science, over and over again, you have new discoveries, things that look at a bigger picture than what we saw before, and you expand sort of theories. So it's like to say something is objective or the brute fact may overlook future discoveries that expand our understanding of things. To claim that nothing can go beyond a point. But I think this is really interesting, sort of on the flip side of it. Not that I think this could be very, very useful, but sometimes what I see is subjective deduction is used a lot with the way that people are manipulated, where people will say, if this were true, I would expect such and such, and because that's not true, I don't believe you. Instead of looking into the actual evidence, they'll make deductions about things based on their expectations. What?
No, I was just going to say, a funny thing is that I looked into something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is essentially what you're talking about, where the person assumes that their way of thinking is just dead on, regardless of what the facts are telling them.
Yeah.
So it's a question of who are the people who are actually experts? How do they feel about situations versus the people who really don't know what they're talking about? Yeah. Why do they feel the way that they do, and why are they so loyal?
Do you think the media tries to boost this effect because it's very useful to have people so confident in their small understanding of things as if it's ever reaching?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the exact reason why when you walk into the grocery store, busy with your life, you walk out paying $100 more than you had planned to. It's because they've manipulated your inabilities and your way of thinking about your world to the degree where you walk out of there fairly still happy about what you've done, even though it's $100 more that you placed into someone else's pot with stuff that you never really wanted. And again, the effect is, how do I get you to walk out of the store happy and spending more money? And that's what you're talking about.
That's very interesting. So a lot of these manipulations, the ending trick is to make people content with being manipulated.
Precisely, precisely. And we seem to already, be sensitive to that. We seem to already want to walk in that direction anyway. That our world, our local view of the world is just the right way of viewing the world. We have it seemingly ingrained.
Well, because people feel grounded this way, the same way people want to know things in advance if this is fate to be, or they're afraid of the unknown possibilities, and they want it laid out as a guaranteed before they step forward into things.
Precisely.
90% of couples all want to use ultrasound to know the whether their baby's going to be a boy or a girl when it's born. You know what I mean? Like they'd rather. Most people don't want to wait. They don't like.
Well, yeah, a lot of interesting thing. It was Kierkegaard. He was talking about the difference between fear and anxiety, and he was saying, fear is localized of something specific, and anxiety is an ungroundedness that you have of not knowing, of the unknown, of something that's, and a lot of people will prearrange things in their head, even if it's not accurate, to feel grounded in an understanding of things. And to question that could be very shaking to their ego. It could have very cognitive dissonance-like effects. So I could very understand why people move towards that direction of having faith in things rather than trust in things based on actuality of things that would provide us trust, rather than just wanting something to be the way that it is.
And there's also, because I absolutely agree with you, there's also this effect that we see in quantum mechanics as well. There seems to, the subject versus object. So the idea is that you, as the subject taking the measurement, completely influence whatever you're measuring.
100%. It's a contrivance of a systematic set. We organize the way the information is processed, but still call it a natural neutral extraction.
Precisely. And so that, becomes compounded when you believe, there are other people who are performing measurements as well. What's happening with theirs versus what's happening with mine? And thus we come back to Bayes and we ask, okay, so how do we put all of these effects into place and still make good decisions? Yeah. It's almost, what would the Vulcans have ever done? Well, they would have devised Bayes' theorem and said, this is how we generate probabilities about what we do, because we don't understand most of what's going on. And
it's also to readdress what you have, the information that you have with these probabilities, so that you're actually reevaluating the way that you're looking at things.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that we talked about is that your approach, or the way you understand the way the world shows up to you, or the way you look at things, your perception of that event, you're seeing things from a certain way, but while something's being disclosed to you, other things are also
being hidden
from you.
The way that things are framed, like for instance, technology, even though it brings so many incredible benefits to society, it hides what isn't allowed to be shown in the technology. So if you had like a calculator and you're doing huge number, multiplications and stuff, if somebody changed the calculator in the background to be off by a tiny bit, you may not pick up on it. You take it for granted, just like a voting system with electronic voter fraud. You expect the technology to be so perfectly accurate that you overlook the human interaction that set it up, just like the way that we extract information and set up theorems and stuff like that. It's a direct contrivance from our first person perspective. So it's, and what he was getting at before was, reevaluating the lens that we're looking at it through, not just the theories we're analyzing it through. So like with ultraviolet rays, prior to the detection of them, we could do, 1,000 different studies on the amount of light frequencies that were available. And without the technology to see them, we'd always get the same results. And it would be correct within that system, but once you expand the system to look at more, it wouldn't really be true.
Yeah.
So it's like the difference between something being correct and something being true. It's, in a locked system, you can get the same results. but maybe that system isn't analyzing everything, and when you expand that system...
that's where physics is at right now. We have the whole realm of physics where we have, but it's divided into classical mechanics, general relativity,
That's right.
special relativity, quantum mechanics, but we have yet to, and those areas explain different things on different scales of size and different, speeds, velocities. But we still have yet to formulate a picture which incorporates all those things. But while classical mechanics may work just fine within a certain framework for,
which is still useful, it's not that it's not directly...
Hey, it took us to the moon.
Yeah.
Right.
Within that thing. But what starts to happen is when we don't realize that we're contriving the way that things show up to us, we overlook our observer's distortion to what's being viewed.
That's right.
Right, and that's why I really like this Bayes theorem, because you're going back on everything you know, and rather than assigning it as a yes or no, or this sort of idea that I had of an ambiguity, it's like, oh, well, you don't really know if it's yes or no, but now we're assigning it a probability.
As far as we know.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, exactly.
So it's like...
Now, I'm going to give you one more thing on Bayes' theorem, and that is there's a quantum Bayes theorem, which was devised and proven by someone called Max Tegmark, Tegmark, I believe. And what he and his graduate student were talking about was something called consciousness as a state of matter. It's kind of where they were going, but it was a generalization of the second law of thermodynamics, is really what this is all about. And in this generalization of Bayes' theorem, we now can begin to ask further questions about what is this thing we're calling consciousness? What is this thing that we're calling a self-perception? And how do we influence the environment around us? And so what we find, for example, is that there are states where you can have negative entropy, where your system, when you take a measurement of your system, what you're actually doing is you're creating something we call negative entropy. You're reducing the amount of information when you take a measurement. Versus when you allow the system to just be on its own, entropy tends to get larger. So it's a lot of stuff wrapped up in his generalization, but it was a very beautiful thing that we've been waiting for in thermodynamics for 100 years. That now, whoa, here we go. Tegmark and his graduate student did it, I guess maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago. But again, it's speaking to the idea of what is consciousness, Bayes' theorem being extended into the quantum realm, et cetera, et cetera.
So, and what you're saying is that the methods that we have to grab information strips it down more so than it by itself outside of our lens.
You got it.
Yeah. So which means that we need to be very reflective over our current lenses and not take anything as a granted. I remember one thing that said,
yes.
He said, there's nothing more detrimental to education than the notion of common sense. When something is common sense, it's taken at face value ad hominem without any analysis or reflection or testing. And that's where discoveries happen.
Of course, the fire just weakened the steel and caused the building to collapse. Common sense.
It's common, and anybody who wouldn't know that is already stupid, so why bother?
and don't get me wrong, this is exactly what science does. It becomes its own church, where that's what they use, which is, hey, this is just the way it is. We've been doing it like this for 200 years. Newton's mechanics, for example, don't question it. But if we didn't question it, we wouldn't have relativity theory. We wouldn't have quantum mechanics.
Or how about,
yeah, exactly. Or if you show us a phenomenon that we can't explain through it, then that phenomenon isn't real. It's not that we need to expand our understanding of things. It's that we know everything. It's just that phenomenon doesn't apply within reality.
Yeah, see, Galileo would be aghast at modern science.
Absolutely.
So, absolutely question.
Relates to this while we're on that. Neil deGrasse Tyson was recently asked about GMOs, and he put a response up that's been getting some waves across the internet. And he basically says, well, we've been genetically modifying organisms for the past 10,000 years, and like all our sheep and cows were genetically modified and domesticated, and
with E. coli
and all the other things that are genetically modified, but and that was his like sort of argument for it. But he completely avoided the issue of labeling, which was huge.
Transparency.
Transparency is really the biggest issue, but also just what exactly is going on with these genetically. What are we genetically modifying?
What type of modification? Yeah, you can be like, people have been making decisions for years. This guy's fine. He's just making a decision. I mean, they've been doing it for 10,000 years.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, where do you draw the line? Because now the genetics technology has gotten advanced to the point where we're taking things out of bacterium and inserting them into, you know, foreign DNA from other species and inserting them into other things in order to change them. So like, you know, for instance, the spider goats or something, you're taking DNA from a spider and putting it into a goat so that you can produce spider silk in its milk, or some of these other things. It's like, these are genetically modified organisms, but what are you doing, and what are you doing it for, and how are you doing it?
And how does each one have a different contextual play? You know, how does each one play out environmentally or chemically? I mean, each one's going to have its own profile of
That's right. Yeah, you look, there's so much of a lack of understanding about DNA and our larger biology. So, for example, it's kind of like what Madame Curie was working with. In other words, they were understanding radioactivity. That was her whole point of doing the work. But in the process, she became radioactive. So did all of her lab materials. So did her husband. So eventually they died from cancer, which honestly they didn't understand that that's what was going to happen. So you have this same effect going on with modern biology. Our understanding is still fairly new.
Right.
We were, you know, the interaction between the small DNA structure and our larger macro environment is still new.
Yeah,
right.
but what happens is it gets married to products that need to be marketed. Right. And I think going back to the notion of, you know,
hey,
talking
that was
about
happening with radioactive. They were selling radioactive bath salts, and people were bathing in like uranium.
But yeah, but what ends up
happening,
happening,
it had health effects and stuff.
So why am I throwing up today?
What ends up happening, what we're talking about, you know, the reason why people aren't talking, well, they are talking in probability, but the reason why people want these brute facts is companies want to be able to stand behind sciences that they can use, and companies want to provide it for them. So they want to say, they're not saying this is the best that we know as of now, they're saying this is it. This is what you've been looking for. So you get this sort of objective claim when all of the discovery has been done through the first person perspective. I mean, you have a subjective objective claim of what the objective is, because, you know, every type of discipline of knowledge, of discussion, of research, of experience is all through the first person. You know, it's a first person perceptual experience.
That's right.
And, you know, what we have is a shared collection of systems to analyze and to create, you know, information that can be used based on those discoveries.
And that's why science generally uses the peer review process. So
that's the exact reason you have peer review.
Yeah, that's quite right. That is exactly the reason. And I also want to point out that when we look at how Americans, for example, are when it comes to math and science, and we see that, you know, from the 60s, we've kind of been going downhill. Our understanding, our desires, are wanting to use math and science on our day-to-day lives or whatever. But so the question becomes, is that a part of the conspiracy, if there is one, that if we dumb down Americans with respect to math and science and with respect to rational ways of thinking, like being Vulcans, you might say, does that then enable the larger consumerism or the corporations to sort of come in and say, hey, we got these poor, stupid fools. They have no idea what's going on.
Sure. Well, I think a really direct way to look at it is just to look at the changes of curriculum in public schooling. I mean, if you look at, like, in Massachusetts, we have the MCAS testing, which is a test that determines the amount of funding that a school gets. And the schools that do worse get less funding, which is kind of weird. But, yeah, you know, we're just checking up on you. All right, these guys are doing good. We'll just keep giving them money.
Right.
But what happens is they test specific topics, and maybe, you know, it's less history, it's less of this social understanding of your place in time in the world. It's more of a cog understanding of science, of math, of something that you could be called on for a job inside of a bureaucratic hierarchy. And this is your function, and we need you to be able to come through on it, rather than free thinking and redesigning a system yourself. So, you know, I think a lot of it is, I mean, I don't know how much of the math I mean, education has definitely gone really bad in the United States, and whether that's just a matter of cutting.
Influences to, like, cut down the type of history that they're taught, because it's like, well, that's not where we're going to be tested on. We're not going to be tested on, you know, how Hitler rose to power in Germany and
to avoid repeating those things. So I think a lot of those are absolutely stripped down, and I think
so. Instead, they talk about the revolution, the American Revolution, but they only tell certain stories or from certain perspectives, and then you get tested on those historical things rather than other ones. So
yeah, it's very simple. You you know, they just pass standardizations, and then the schools conform to the curriculum of the standardizations. And it's a very easy way to make a lot of people go along with a system that maybe isn't the best and maybe designed by a very few amount of people who possibly had a conspiracy in mind or not. I mean, if you look at a great movie with Century of the South, this documentary about Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann.
Doesn't necessarily have to be a conspiracy. It could just be like the people on the board of that are influenced by some other reason to do this.
Oh, absolutely. Like, an example was with like
you know.
Edward Bernays and stuff, where you're looking back at like the radio. There was this whole discussion between whether songs on the radio should be about superficial consumption or whether they should be about real issues. And they thought that if they played songs that had more depth to them, that people would start thinking about all these other aspects of life and start reflecting on things that they wanted changed in society. But if they gave them superficial material that just kind of focused on
Cars
egotism and consumption, it would fuel their industry without really provoking people's minds or
But I
sparking.
still love you, Madonna. I still love you. Okay.
Oh,
I still love
entertainment is entertainment.
The Beach Boys, even though most of their songs about, you know, cars.
I don't think it's bad to enjoy it. It's the fact that they stripped down a bubble of just that.
That's right.
So that they could saturate the public with that exposure.
Well, that helps you also if you're a songwriter, you know, like if you want to get on the radio, you got to write about superficial nonsense.
Well, if that's what they're putting on, people assimilate in order to get picked. It's what TRL teaches people in America. You know, it teaches you realize what they're looking for, and if you want to make it big, you assimilate to the structure that's already producing.
Right.
But one of the other examples we were talking about before, you know, so much of this is jumping all around, but so much of the society is based on just as much selling and profit margin as possible. And if you look at arts like music and stuff, there's certain albums where you can have an album that you can listen to for 10 years because it just has so much content. It just, you know, it never really gets boring.
Just press play.
But
and then you have one.
if you have an album you can listen
That's
to for
right.
10 years, you may not be buying as many albums. So, you know, if you put something that's mediocre, that's catchy, that they can play over and over again until everybody hates it, they basically create and destroy things to shorten the turnover process of purchasing. So, you know, there's so many, or to accelerate, you know, the whole idea is if we can create things that you buy and then we already have your money, if we destroy it, you're going to need your next thing. So, you know, so many of these
I love
changes
that song,
of culture.
but it got played out totally. You know?
Oh, I used to love that song, but then they played it over and over again. I need a new album. But you know, it's about changing the way that the world shows up to us so that we act in a certain way. It's all about influencing intentionality, worldview, understanding the way that we process information and then make decisions as a result, or support decisions of people, political leaders and stuff, or go along. You know, manufacturing consent is also a huge part of it. But also manufacturing blind consent to the manipulations, as you were talking about, that we engage in. Of, you know, a successful manipulation is one that's not apparent. It's one that's invisible.
Yeah, they walk away happy.
And when you talk to people about, hey, do you know about all the manipulations that are currently, you know, being used in the media? They go, oh, I know about all of them. You know, it's the whole purpose that it, you know, if you knew about it, it wouldn't have that functionality. And just that alone really should make people look under the iceberg to see. You know, the social theory, I mean, so much of it was written in the 1920s before the TV. It's just been sophisticated and applied through mass technology and communications in ways that make it more effective.
Leveraged buyouts of media corporations.
Yeah, oh, we'll put up, all right, we're going to put up some Walter Lippmann. Public Opinion is an incredible, just him.
I'm going to put up links to all this stuff, the Wikipedia articles and stuff. Right now, and we'll put it up after the show so people can check that stuff out. And we got 5 minutes left, and then we'll wrap this up. Anything else you want to bring up, Greg, or mention before we wrap this show up for today?
No, I just want to say thank you, guys. It's been fantastic. So keep talking,
Dude, thank you so much for calling in. The Bayes theorem, and then the Dunning and the
Kruger
stuff, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the Tegmark. I'm going to put up links to all that stuff so people can read up on that, because it's really, that's some interesting stuff there.
Just to touch into this, that really reminds me of, there's this phenomenon, one of the things that we've been bringing up was the $2.3 trillion missing from the Department of Defense, 1990 to 2000. Rumsfeld admitted it September 10th, the day before that area of the Pentagon got hit. Records I mean, sketchy stuff, but when I bring it up to people, I have the congressional video of it, I have the hearings, I have all the information that documents it. But you talk to people and they go 2.3 trillion. Like, that's a lot. I would have heard about that. You know, I would have been informed because I can talk to 10,000 other people who don't know about it. You're the one crazy person bringing it up, and it can't be, you know, with subjective deduction, there's no way that could be true, because I hear about Britney Spears every day. Of course I would have heard about 2.3 trillion, right?
Or, yeah, or anything to do with
if I'm hearing about that stuff, you know, I have to have, obviously they've already gone through all the important stuff.
Right. It's just that method is very effective and very useful at
shutting people down before they even research things.
Yeah, shutting people down before, but even hiding large scale public events that should be like well known and you know, or whatnot. It's just a way of enforcing that propaganda. They're not hearing it on the mainstream media is not talking about this. It must not be true, or they said it wasn't true. You know?
Yeah, or it's the understanding of this notion of power in numbers, that, you know, because so many people thought the world was flat at one period of time, it must have been flat.
That's a very good one.
How many people bought, you know, the billions of McDonald's hamburgers that were sold? They must be good hamburgers.
But it's not just that the world was flat. It's just that so many people believed that it was a majority rule thing, but observation confirmed those results too. That was a misobservation.
Yeah, we were limited to our first-person exposure of what showed up to our world.
So that's definitely a thing we, as scientists and just truth seekers and everyone, have to be aware of, is these effects of your own consciousness, your own viewpoint, and reanalyzing the lens at which you view things through, and understanding that you know, not just holding everything you're basing your conclusions on as absolutes, also using them as a series of probabilities and assigning probabilities to things to say that, you know, well, this could be true, but there's a chance that it might not be true as well. So,
yeah, it's like, you know, it seems a lot of people are so concerned with making sure that they feel that they're right rather than being accurate. You know, they're more concerned with not looking like an idiot and being taken for wrong than actually reevaluating something. Not that this is everybody, but there's definitely a huge population who, you can call it stubbornness, but whatever drives it, there's something that makes them want to prove to you that they were right regardless of the information. And if you can understand what drives that in whatever situation it is, you can understand the motivation of so many of these people and help break down, you know, whether it's a logical motivation or whether it's a manipulative motivation that's driving them.
All right. Well, excellent show today, everyone. Ken, Matt, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for running this for us today, Alex, over at Zen Live TV. Once again, checking out from New York, Zen Live TV. Thank you all for watching.